Good afternoon, everyone. How do our attitude and beliefs affect whether or not we can heal? Do our emotions play a part of that? Are there life lessons in any disease we might have, and what can we learn from that? We're going to talk about that and much, much more today on Reawaken Your Brilliance. I am phoning in from my home studio in Raleigh. We are stuck with snow, and here in the southeast, the city completely shuts down. We got 2 to 3 inches, and my outside of my house is a sheet of ice. So we've got the less formal studio, so sorry about that, but the show must go on, and in those cases, sometimes you have to do it from home. So in tonight's Reawaken You,
I don't get it.
since we're talking about healing and belief systems, I want you to examine during this next week an area in your life where you don't believe in yourself or you believe that something can happen. Because even if we're really positive and believe certain things in areas of our life, there might be another area where you think, you know what, it just can't happen. I can't find that relationship. I can't heal from trauma. I will always be hard of hearing, whatever it is. Take a look at your own belief system, and we're going to learn some practical tools tonight, hopefully, that can help you overcome that. All right, we're going to tell you about tonight's guest. If I can pull it up, here we go. Deborah Lloyd is a Usi and Karuna Reiki master and certified holistic therapy practitioner. She also is a licensed clinical social worker working with a hospice agency in Asheville, North Carolina. She grew up on a farm in rural Indiana and was stricken with polio at the age of 3. To relieve fatigue from post-polio syndrome, she learned Reiki. This complementary technique led her to explore other alternative modalities. Her personal journey, along with life lessons learned along the way, is detailed in her book, Believe in It's True, A Story of Healing and Life Lessons. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Julie. I'm very excited to be here today.
So let's get started. Talk briefly about your childhood. I mean, polio is a serious disease. And, most people are listening are probably going to be surprised that that's something that, you were able to work with and overcome. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, polio was a very serious disease in the 40s and 50s. And the vaccine did come out in the mid-50s. And I actually had 2 of the vaccinations and still got polio. What I have found out in more recent years is that the earliest vaccines were around 80% effective. There were actually a good number of cases in this country until 1960. But I was 3 years old, and my earliest memories are not being able to walk at all without the use of the big metal braces that they had with the leather straps that went across and wooden crutches. Then in 1960, I did have 2 surgeries, one on each leg and foot, and they transferred muscles from my legs to build up my feet. I remember not being able to flex my feet. And from that point on, I actually got stronger, but I was still experiencing weakness and atrophy, but I got along. As anyone does with a chronic condition, you move forward in life, and things went pretty well for, I can't remember, 30, 40 years. I have to do my math. But it was in the early 90s when I started having new problems.
And is that what led you to Reiki?
Yes, it is. There's a number of symptoms associated with post-polio syndrome, but my main symptom was chronic fatigue. And because Reiki is an energy healing, and our fatigue and energy levels, of course, ties in so strongly with energy. Reiki truly changed my life.
And so that was that the beginning of your exploration or opening your awareness that you could it was now chronic fatigue, that you could battle chronic fatigue and it wasn't a life sentence that you had to accept?
Absolutely. In fact, I went to a doctor who specialized in post-polio syndrome, and he was wonderful, but he also told me the most I could hope for was to maintain where I was at. And that did set me up for not having very realistic expectations of what really could happen. So not only did Reiki help me get rid of my fatigue, I actually have had physical improvements in my legs and feet better than I can ever remember in my entire life.
I want you to address that really quickly because I know there are a lot of people out there that are, it doesn't matter what they're dealing with, where doctors have told them, you know what, you can't cure it, this is the best you're going to hope for, have just said, nope, no more than this. What would you say to them? And if someone has a doctor like that, what's your advice?
What I would say to them is make your own plan. Really look at your beliefs and really start questioning yourself. Is this really true? Do I have to accept this? And the answer is no. You can develop a good life. You can work through, I believe, any problem. Of course, there will be situations that cannot really be healed at some point, but the healing might be our acceptance of it, or the healing might be using that condition for different purposes.
I think that's so important to state because I prepare a couple questions for each interview, but I really kind of like to be in the moment and let the conversation flow. But I was reminded the other day, I read about this study, I think it was maybe 10 years ago when I was in California, and this woman would scientifically study the power of prayer. And so she was able to come up with, I mean, it was a very fascinating study. People thought she was nuts, but scientifically say, yeah, the power of prayer does help. But ironically, she, I believe, got cancer. And then when, and she had tons of people praying for her and she still died. Now, I didn't see that as a failure. How I viewed that is her mission, her role in this lifetime was to bring about, scientifically, prayer can help people. And she did that. She accomplished that mission. And just because she died doesn't mean it's a failure.
I agree with you totally. And you mentioned I am a social worker. I actually work in the field of hospice now. So basically all of my patients' days are numbered. Of course, all of our days are numbered, but I see a lot of healing in my work. Among my patients and the family members, healing can be just really accepting our life, not being so hard on ourselves, giving forgiveness to ourselves and to the people in our lives. There's many, many ways to heal. Really, healing is unlimited. I actually believe all of us have something to heal all the time. Of course, some things may seem bigger than others or more important, but all of us has some area to heal. And why is that? Because we're all still human beings. None of us are quite 100% divine yet, although I believe all of us have that divinity within us. We still live in the human condition, and we have a lot of people and a lot of problems in our world, a lot of stressors.
I agree with you 100%. I just got diagnosed that I have profound hearing loss in both ears. And so I knew I had one ear was bad, but I'm like, oh, it's just gone downhill. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get hearing aids, but I believe I can heal my hearing. I believe that with all my soul. For me, it's about clearing stuff and continue and I want to get into this about the root causes and the root beliefs. I have a friend who was in a car accident, got double vision. He couldn't drive for 2 years. He worked on himself. He can see now. He doesn't have the double vision and he can now drive. So I'm a big believer of that. But in your work, what would you say is some of the common maybe core beliefs, or I'm not maybe using the right term, as why people believe they can't heal?
I think the core belief is people don't think they're worthy. They don't think they really deserve a full healing. And it really does go back to feelings of low self-esteem. And so often those feelings of low self-esteem are tied in with that issue. I'm going to pick out one of the more common ones in our society is the problem of being overweight. I'm going to pick on the women, many women especially. When they were little, heard you were heavy, you're too big, you're the biggest one in the class, you're not attractive because you're big. Then we get into these vicious cycles and it just becomes circular because we have the low self-esteem. Then we don't take all the steps that we can to heal that. But I would say that's the underlying cause of so many problems. We really just don't believe, first of all, that it's possible, but more underneath that is that we're truly deserving of such a good healing or such a great move forward in our lives, a big step forward.
That's interesting. I had a client recently, and I do help people clear the clutter inside and out, so professional organizing and coaching. And she's extremely overweight, but I'm just so proud of her. One of the manifestations of that was clutter in her house. And she said, I realized that this is something I had to work on in conjunction with everything else. And, she had someone over to her house for the first time in years. That to me was a boost to her self-esteem. But I think you really hit on, I think we all loved ourselves and had believed in ourselves, we would live in a much different world. And, when we're babies, we're born and we're perfect and all that. And then somehow along the way, life happens, parents happens, teachers happen, friends happen, and that changes. So I think that's a really good example. So either share, from your personal experience, if you're comfortable, what would you say to someone who has low self-esteem? What is something that they could start to switch that?
Well, there's a number of methods that people can use. One of the things that I actually did was healing that child part of myself. Here I am, a professional social worker. I've done many years of mental health, counseling, psychotherapy, and I did a lot of work on myself. But when I started this really big healing journey, which now goes back, well, the major work was about 5 years ago. So here I am in my mid-50s. I really went back and healed that inner child of myself. And I did some visualization where I talked to the little girl part of me and just really loved her. And I started experiencing the emotions that I had back then. When I say the emotions I had back then, I'm talking 3 and 4 and 5 years old. Emotions that I did not remember here, but I did remember them in my heart. And I got them out. And I just loved that little girl to pieces and just really told her she was good, she was whole, she was lovable. And one of the biggest emotions that I did re-experience was fear. I never got in touch with how scary it must have felt to wake up one morning as a 3-year-old and could not walk. The day before, I was running all over the house and the yard. I never got in touch with that before.
That's really incredible. And at 2, you wouldn't have had, I don't think, the capability to deal with that. You mean that's just at a level that's an adult level. That's not a child level.
And that's so true. I did not have the language, the understanding, and I certainly don't blame my parents or the adults around me. It was more of an attitude, we just got to make the best of what we got dealt with in life and keep on going. And we never revisited that. And I did not revisit it as an adult either until I really started this healing journey.
Now that made me think of something as you were talking, because polio was something that, as you said, it affected a lot of people in the 40s and 50s. Do you believe that there was, because we're definitely going to talk about life lessons too, was there a group life lesson in polio? I mean, what do you think about something like polio or AIDS that affects so many people? What's the larger lesson from there? Or do you believe that affects people with a certain issue?
No, I believe there is a life lesson in it. And actually, one of the things I came up with, I wrote a little bit about this in my book, is that the big part of it happened around the time of World War II. And if you look at what was going on, not only in this country, but all over the world, and what the goals were within the world of taking over people, of taking over countries, and I mean, there were just terrible things going on. I have to wonder if it didn't happen to kind of refocus people in on family, on children, what really is the priority. The other thing that people do forget, a number of children died. I was lucky, as were many others, that we did not die. There were a number of children. I'm sure we've all seen children in iron lungs. Some of those children did live. A lot of them did not survive that. So there was a lot of death too. There were hardships, there was death, and there was just no answer for really quite a long time. So I think there might have been a connection with World War II and kind of bringing the most important priorities to the forefront.
Absolutely.
And we could say the same thing about AIDS. If we really looked at HIV and AIDS, that really started in the late 80s. And all the biases and prejudices that happened, especially in the early days, the medical profession and everybody had to step back, take a deep breath, and realize you're not going to catch AIDS by sitting next to someone on a city bus. It just did not happen that way.
I also wonder certain things. There's been a lot of talk in our country about Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, this universal health care system. But, my personal take is it's maybe will solve a little bit. I don't believe so. But what I choose to believe is that hopefully this is the impetus to get us into alternative medicine more, to get us into work that you're doing with Reiki, to get us to believe that we can heal, because I think that doesn't have a side effect. You don't have to take a pill for that. And that's where true healing, in my opinion, begins. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a number of thoughts being a social worker. I think, when everyone, again, steps back, takes a deep breath, what we really have to look at is what is going on in our country and our priorities. There are so many people that cannot access any kind of doctors or any kind of health care. And I've dealt with many of these people. There are a number of people that qualify for Medicaid, but they don't make enough money to buy health insurance. And yes, I do hope the alternative medicines get covered because they're a great preventative.
I hope so too. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of issue on my end here, Deb, and my husband's trying to figure it out. Can you tell us about your 3 core life lessons and what those are, and briefly describe those, and then we'll go from there?
Yes. One of my most important life lessons is that healing is always possible. And we really have to grasp that concept that there is nothing that could not be healed. So like I said, healing is always, always possible. And it does start with a belief that is possible, and we go from there. Okay, another core lesson is that once we really believe that is possible, opportunities will come into our life. Unfortunately, what we do is we get invitations, and often we say no to those. The invitation might be a person comes into your life, someone tells you about a modality that might be good for you, but you choose not to follow it. Things like that. So once we say yes, then more and more opportunities come our way. And that's actually what happened to me. So I think that's very important. And then last but not least, healing must occur on all levels: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And we cannot compartmentalize those aspects of ourselves. And if we really look at any and all diseases, we will see there's a correlation in an area for healing, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I love your example of your friend that had the car accident. And losing the vision, because at the end of the day, I really do believe all 3 aspects were involved for him.
Absolutely. I believe that too. I love how you talk about saying yes. She doesn't like the word mentor, my inner world guide, but I had a woman, was out in Los Angeles. I just started the show, and I said, hey, the guest was in Honduras. She said, oh, we're going to have a tornado. I want to cancel a couple days before because I just don't know if I'm going to have power. So I said, hey, would you want to be on the show? And she said, a couple days before, she said, I'm going to say yes to everything. And that ended up resulting in a great friendship, helping me with a lot of things. She's been on the show a couple times. But because she was willing to say yes to everything, that made the difference. Now, do you, in your course, and you talk about yourself, or if you want to give examples of other people, what would be the first thing, the step that someone needs to take, is it to change their belief that they can heal? What's the first step? What are your thoughts?
Actually, I think it does begin in our mind. So, whatever you need to do to start believing it, and I actually use this all the time, way back when I did a lot of psychotherapy work, is someone would make a comment, then I would dig one level under that. Then we dig another level under that. And many times we have core beliefs and we do not realize how they spiral into our actions and into our thoughts. And back then, when tape recorders were really big, we actually did a guided imagery where I would have them picture a tape recorder in their head, and we would erase the tape, and then we would start with a new tape. And that was just so powerful because people got stuck in those old messages and those old beliefs that were no longer working for them. But they didn't even realize they were no longer working for them until we examined it.
I appreciate that you talk about layers. So I talked to you briefly about my hearing. I am recently married, and when I first met my husband, he had a cat, and I was deathly allergic to cats. Literally, if I would spend an hour sneezing, drainage, all that fun stuff. And up until meeting him, I'd started the show, and so, I always research and learn about things. And so I want to help others with the show. I believe every time I do an interview, it helps me. So by the time we met, I had no issues with Joey. And if you would have told me that even a couple years ago, like, there's no way. I'm allergic to cats, and that's how it is for life, and you just can't reverse allergies. Life doesn't work that way. So, that's why I believe I can heal my hearing. I thought, well, if you can work on yourself to get allergies, healing's the next step. So talk about that if you have any thought between layers of things and different issues that people have.
Yes, the other analogy I like to use is peeling an onion. We just have layers and layers. And another way I look at it as, so often people come in, whether it's psychotherapy or a Reiki session, or probably, I'm sure, doctors and medical people see this too, where they want one appointment, 1 hour session, and hope to fix everything. Well, life isn't that way, and our development isn't that way. We layer up with all our days, with all of our moments, week after week, year after year, and we cannot fix that in an hour. So I guess another way of looking at it is, as a child, we do develop these core beliefs, and then they get layered over time with one thing after another, because one thing leads to another. Does that make sense? Let's see if I can. Well, if I have a core belief that I'm not a good person, then that gets played out in many, many different ways. So then a person may come in to a doctor's appointment or a therapist appointment with kind of top layer with what's going on now. So we have to kind of, break that down over the years and over the decades and see what's really underneath it all.
Now, I want to remind everyone, if you're listening, you can chat in a question I'm happy to ask, or you can call 919-518-9773 or Skype Computers 2K Voice. This is your show. We want to make sure that your questions are answered. Now, Deb, I was also thinking about what your thoughts are about, I want to use anger specifically, because I see, you talk about peeling the onion, and I've had a lot of anger. I've gotten rid of stuff, but, I'm like, oh, here's some more. All right, come up and let go. But what would you say to someone who's very angry? Because I see Facebook has kind of been my big lesson learner. And, I will watch people's posts, and it really, how they write it, what they're posting about all the time really tells me a lot about them. And, I have a friend on there, and, she's just so angry. And so to me, if she 10 down the road, 5 years down the road has some major issue, I'm not going to be shocked. But I would think anger, or maybe it's sadness. Are there major emotions that you see that really affect people?
Yes, and actually, way back in psychotherapy school, we always called anger a secondary emotion, that there was always something underneath it. And the number one thing I think underneath anger is fear. Often we get angry about a situation where we have fear that we cannot control it, or it's going to work out really poorly for us. And I am a believer that the two basic emotions are love and fear. And everything comes out of those emotions, one or the other. So I do see anger in general is fear-based. And if you look at some of the things going on in our country right now, some of the anger that's out there is that I'm not going to get it my way, or I'm going to lose my money and my resources if we go along with a particular plan or a particular way of being. So anger to me is very interesting, and actually it's usually pretty easy to get to what's underneath it if you really spend any time with it. And when I say you spend any time, you as the angry person, if you take some time about what am I angry about and what am I really scared of, usually the answer's there.
Yeah, I think that's very true. What would you say to someone, because I always try to meet people where they are, and that I don't mean that as an insult or a judgment, but I've learned, for me, my aha moment was my younger brother saying to me, "You see yourself as a victim." And in that moment, I heard him. And I was like, wow, he's right. And so that kind of started a self, exploration for me, and kind of was the beginning of it all. But I always try to say something, if I can, so that people can hear it. We don't want advice. What would you say to someone? What suggestion, or to use advice, if they know someone that's really angry or really depressed or really in a negative, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, state? Right. What are your thoughts? What could you say maybe to help them take that first step?
Sometimes just reflecting back to people what's going on can be very effective. Saying something like, I was just thinking, it seems like you're angry a lot of the time. And I really wonder what's going on for you. Are there difficulties in your life? Is there something else going on? Because anger is one of those things that often we don't aim it towards what we're really angry about. We put it elsewhere. A lot of angry people get diffused very quickly when they realize that someone is really interested in them and really want to know what is going on with them. That is probably the biggest anger diffuser in the whole world. Angry people, if they continue to do that, end up being quite isolated many times, because they will lose friends, they may even lose relationships. So to have someone really pay attention to them can feel very good. But it can also challenge them, because at the end of the day, anger is a choice. And acting in an angry way is a choice.
Absolutely. I say all the time, in every moment of every day, you have a choice. And the power of change comes from choice. I know for me, part of that victim mentality for so long was I let my past run my life and dictate everything to it. But I felt imprisoned to that. I felt like I couldn't take a choice. But again, as I've developed and evolved and learned these things, then I'm a big fan of that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about bringing this up with your first core life lesson. The foundation is healing is always possible in our lives. While past painful events cannot be changed, it's possible to find acceptance and learn from the events. So talk about that, because I think that's very important. That's something I had to heal within myself as well. Can you expand on that?
Yes. If we really take time and examine different things that have happened to us in our lives, and we can find the purpose in it. And I did do that with the polio, because for many years I detached myself as much as I could from the experience. I did not want people to see that in me. I did not want to talk about it. I wanted to get on with my life. But it was really taking the time and examining why it might have happened to me that I really got some life lessons. And certainly, the most obvious thing to me is my compassionate heart. And I think that's why I was led to do social work, because I really do feel for other people and I can identify with them. And this, I rarely have anyone that's had polio, but they have some difficulty in their life. So I know what it feels like to be different. I know what it feels like to be prejudged. So I think it only takes a little bit of examination to figure out really what a purpose might be. And it's always not just one purpose either. I believe there are many, many purposes for having something major in your life like this happen.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. And I think if people would start to, well, one, do more self-examination, but realize out of maybe, from a painful experience that they can have a blessing, then we'd be much better off.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the blessing word. And it's really developing a attitude of gratitude. We've heard that a lot. But actually getting to a place of being thankful for the lessons that a difficult situation has given you. And again, I did not feel that for decades, but now I do. And I really am grateful for not only that life experience, but other difficult experiences that I've had in my life too.
Is there a quick or short or fun exercise that you could lead us in?
Wow, that's an interesting question.
And if not, that's okay. I try to just always give people tools, and we record this and people can watch it again. So I tell them if they're driving or listening that
Okay. Yeah, well, I am a journaler, so I really do like to journal. So really starting off with the basic question, it could be anything from when in my life would I like to change? And I like to do free writing journaling. And what that means is you just let the pen flow. Any thought that comes to mind, you write it down. You don't have to worry about sentences, don't worry about punctuation, and really just let it flow. And then go back and reread it. And honestly, I think you'll be stunned by what comes up. I know I have been many times. So I believe in journaling. I also believe in meditation and working very hard to get thoughts out of your mind. And, I really did learn this in yoga. If a thought comes into your mind, just to acknowledge it and then let it go. So those are two of the quick things that I can come up with. I
that's
also
okay.
think
Go ahead.
sometimes, I think talking with other people, the right people, can be very, very helpful too.
I think that many people said that. I think meditation is key. And one thing that I've learned, oh, sorry, we have a cat crossing here. Anytime I talk to anyone that's high vibing, he's got to come in and be part of the action. He's seen you though. He's ready to go. Again, sorry, sometimes that happens. We have to, again, I apologize where I'm Skyping in from home, but that's how it goes. I think that what I've learned is meditation doesn't have to be, sitting with the pillow in your hands like that. It can be while you're mowing the lawn or you're listening to classical music, whatever is going to enable you to relax and get into that deep state.
Absolutely. And, there's certain places where it's just so much easier. For me, going to the beach, I can get into that place even if there's 5,000 people around me on a beach. There's something about the water. And I think each person has to find their own place sometimes. I also believe in guided imagery. In other words, you can take yourself to a place like the beach and have some really good meditations. So yes, I agree with you. Traveling, not while you're driving, but being the passenger on an airplane or in the car, that's another good time for me. We do a lot of car travel. So when my husband's driving, just closing my eyes and, like you said, go to that other place is really helpful.
How has your Reiki study and practice influenced what you believe are life lessons in healing?
Oh, it's been a strong influence. And I think probably the most important message of that I've gotten from Reiki is everything is energy. Even our thoughts are energy. I've become much more mindful of my thoughts. I catch myself if I say something negative to myself, like, oh, that was really stupid, or you're having a idiotic day or whatever. I catch it now and I stop it. And it is important because all those negative messages that we give ourselves does develop into energy. It creates energy. How can we feel good if we're talking ourselves down and criticizing ourselves all day long? So I have become much, much more mindful and aware of energy that I'm creating, but also the energy around me.
So I've never studied Reiki. I've studied a little bit of energy healing. So would you say, let's talk about all those negative thoughts. Do you then in Reiki see what I would call maybe a block, or do you see a stagnant energy? I mean, so you literally see the negative thoughts manifest in the physical. And if I'm speaking incorrectly, please correct me.
Okay, I don't actually see the energy or see auras. There are people who can do that. That is not one of my gifts. But what has happened over time is I feel the energy, and I am getting little messages like um, right here. I mean, I can feel an area that's depleted, and I will spend more time with my hands right there. But I might get messages. The reason this person is feeling depleted is because they are giving too much energy and not taking care of themselves. Or they're really, really stressed out, or they feel irritated about a situation. I did have a gentleman a couple of years ago where all the energy right around here was just really strongly negative. And I brought that up to him, and the message I had gotten is he gives himself negative self messages all day long. And he just looked at me and went, "How did you know that?" And I said, "It wasn't me." It was really, and I do believe I get messages from Spirit, but Spirit told me he really needed to work on that. And it was manifesting into a depression. He wasn't quite clinically depressed yet, but that's where he was going.
Now, I want to remind everyone, if you have a question for Deb, I'm happy to answer it via chat or call in at 919-518-9773 or Skype Computers 2K Voice. What are some other life lessons from your book that you'd like to share? You have 33 practical life lessons, and what I think is helpful, again, I believe in the woo-woo, but, I want everyone on the planet to heal. And I think, your book enables people to meet them where they are. They can read this and not be scared by it, not be turned off by it. So are there other ones that you'd like to share that you feel are really important?
Yes. Let me just look at here real quick.
I know there are a lot. It's kind of hard. You can't. I've learned also what they don't tell you as you get older, how you forget things. I'll remember it, and then 5 seconds later, if I don't write it down, I'm like, really? That's something I should have committed to heart. What's going on?
Well, I'm glad I looked at the book because I did think of an important area, and that's taking responsibility for our own healing. When I'm going to go back to when we talked about people coming in and wanting a fix in 1 hour. And our whole culture's that way, unfortunately. People think they can go into a doctor and get a pill, and they don't have to worry about their high blood pressure, or they don't have to worry about, so many other things, their depression, their anxiety, the list goes on and on. And I do believe that sometimes we do need that chemical boost, even if it's just to get us back on track for a little while. So I'm not totally against all medications, but I also think we should not depend on medications solely for as many things as we do. So we need to take responsibility. We can't just sit back and you use the victim word. I think that's a great word because I think in many ways we do become victims of our culture, of old beliefs. So we've got to work out of that. We've got to take responsibility for our healing, for our own actions, and look into things. I mean, my goodness, we have more resources with the internet and with access to such wonderful books and articles and really talk shows like this. There are so many wonderful, radio shows now on the internet. We really could spend a lifetime, and YouTube's. I mean, we have so much out there. There's really no excuse not to learn about all these different things and choose what is right for us. I also believe in discernment. I talk about that in the book. Because there's so much out there, and it's not that things are bad or wrong, but it may not be what you need right at this time. And it might even be that you will need it, but you have to do some other work first before you can go to this next step.
Now, I would say to someone who maybe, again, is just testing the waters, I would always say, listen to your gut, listen to how you feel. And that would be a good indication for you whether or not you should, and again, it might be with an alternative therapy. Maybe acupuncture is, like you said, not what you need now. Maybe you need to work on something mental.
Exactly. And listening to your gut is a form of taking responsibility, because you're not listening to all the voices out there, but you're sitting with your own meditative thoughts, with the guidance that you can get by listening to your gut. And I do say that all the time. And I think if any of us goes back and looks at some of the mistakes we've made in life, on some level we knew we were going down the wrong road.
Absolutely. And you know what I found interesting in my life? When I lived in LA, I is at HMO, it was kind of the managed care, and I was sick. I mean, not desperately ill, but tired all the time. And they'd be like, "Oh, we'll go to this doctor, get this scan or whatever." And I went along with it. And then when I moved out here, really at the tail end of living in LA, started my personal journey, the healing journey. And then I moved out here, and I stopped taking a flu shot. Now, I know that might not sound significant, but every year I'd get a flu shot because I was told that was what I needed to do. And like clockwork, I was out for 2 weeks with the flu. So, and then when I started my business, I'm like, okay, I've got to, have bad insurance. And so I'm going to not go unless I'm completely desperate. And I was like, you know what? I let go of a bad job, and for the first year I didn't have the flu. And since then, I have not gotten the flu. And it used to be I'd get the shot and it would put me out for 2 weeks. But since starting to have better eating habits and doing alternative care, I'm sick a lot less.
Well, you're giving a perfect example of taking responsibility for your own health. And I think that's wonderful that you did that. And it really is a good example that when things don't work, why do we keep going back to them? Because people told us to.
Right, right.
But your gut was saying, maybe this isn't such a good idea. We've all done those things. So we have to, accept that that's what we did, and it's okay. We learned something from it, but now we're going to make our own decisions. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the next.
What would you say to someone who's maybe really shy or really timid, and they've got the doctor barking at them, and maybe they're not in a supportive family, so they maybe need a little more assistance than others? What would be your advice to them?
What I would say to someone like that, there might be times when we need to have a buddy go with us. If that's what's going, it's okay to get some support. It's okay to maybe even talk to a professional. A lot of people think therapy always has to be like really deep and abstract. You're going to go back to your childhood. A lot of therapy is real practical. And I can help people, or the therapist can help people to frame. They can even do some modeling or some role play. It doesn't even have to be a therapist. It can be someone that you really trust. Role playing is actually very powerful. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to do that, but to really, set up a situation and go back and forth. And what's really the most powerful is to play both roles.
Oh, I think that would be extraordinary. One thing I want you to talk more about is forgiveness, because I read a book called Radical Forgiveness, which reframed how I thought of forgiveness. And they had a little sheet that you would do. So when I need to forgive, my friends tease me about it, but when I need to forgive someone, I go through this kind of exercise and steps, and not quite role playing, but it is in the sense that you have to figure out what you learned from it, or what your role in is, and try to see their perspective. So I find that to be really valuable. But I think forgiveness is another thing, especially in our culture, that all of us could benefit from. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree. So many people confuse forgiveness and forgetting a situation. Or if they think if they ask for someone's forgiveness that the other person needs to respond appropriately. Many times that's not going to happen because the other person isn't ready to go there yet. Forgiveness is really a healing of our own self. It's a healing of our own heart. And sometimes strategically it's even best not to go to the other person. And, my favorite example of that, of course, is sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
You may need to forgive the abuser without talking to that abuser. It doesn't mean you forget the situation. It doesn't mean that you minimize the situation, but you forgive yourself. Because what do most people feel when they've been sexually abused? Is that somehow they did something to cause it. They feel a lot of shame. They feel a lot of unworthiness, and it does get spread to other areas of their life. And they feel less than other people. So there's a lot of forgiveness that they can do for themselves. And sometimes what they can do is really look at what was that other person thinking and feeling. And again, it's not forgetting about the situation, but anyone who can do that is indeed obviously not a strong person, not a healthy person, not a balanced person. They've got many, many issues of their own. And I have seen many situations when, again, we looked at what was going on for the other person, that a lot of understanding came, which made it easier for the victim to heal themselves.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic example. Again, as the Catholic Church is a great great example, that, I suspect as the truth comes out more everywhere in our society, we're going to find more institutions like that in the Boy Scouts where, the systematic abuse was allowed to happen. And then when you look at our society with addiction to sex and drugs and alcohol and everything else, to me, in my mind, it makes sense.
Yes, and it is happening in other institutions. Of course, the whole Penn State situation. So you have to step back and go, here again, institutions have the wrong priority. Their priority was keeping their power. Their priority was keeping it secretive, not letting the world know what was going on. So we are seeing a great, here I'm back to my onion analogy again, a great unpeeling of many institutions that their mission statement was one thing, but their actions did not fit it. And talked about some of those.
Now, you'd mentioned earlier, which I agree with you, that anger, there's usually something underneath it. And I've personally found a lot of times for me it was sadness. But I also agree with you that there's either love or fear. But in your work, have you found, because I believe I've read somewhere, for instance, that cancer is caused a lot of times by resentment, a long-term resentment or feeling resentment a long time. Have you found that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that happens in some cases, but I also think our whole society, and now I'm going to go back to this whole energy analogy, our whole world is full of energy, and we have so many negative things around us that we can be the most positive person in the world, but we might be, through no fault of our own, eating toxic foods. We are affected by all the negativity and the stress. Just spend a day in a very stressful situation, like a workplace where it's very, very stressful. It's very hard not to take that on. It's possible with lots of intention and a lot of hard work, and I've done it a few times. After I became involved with Reiki, I actually was at a workplace that was starting to fall apart, and the stress level was so high. I was using Reiki to protect myself and my energy. Before that, I would have been just strung out, fatigue-wise and everything. So I think there's many causes to cancer. But yes, I do think there's certain situations where the resentments and the victimization can become so great that it makes us more susceptible to getting cancer and many other diseases too.
The last job I was in was, and again, I'm grateful for them every day because they were so horrible to me. I would have never had the courage to start my own business because my attitude was, it can't be any worse than this. But I used to say by the time I left there, that you could bring a crystal bowl into that situation and it would explode because the energy was so strong and negative. There was just no other option than that.
Right. Instead, you brought your whole being.
Right.
Spirit. Yeah. But we all do that, and there are just certain situations that we cannot avoid.
Right.
you know. So I really have become more mindful. I believe that you don't have to be a Reiki practitioner to protect yourself. There are other ways of doing it. And I do talk about intention quite a bit in my book. So you can set the intention of just picturing like divine light around you. And I do believe that gives us some protection. I do think knowing some of the energy modalities can give you even more. But we can do that. We can go into difficult situations and just look at all the people in the world that do that on a daily basis. Our rescue workers, our police, our firefighters, doctors and nurses, and all of us, you know, there are many people that that is their life work to go into hard situations.
Right. And I think you'd mentioned this earlier. I think gratitude is so important. And I find when I'm, starting to worry or stressed out, I'm like, okay, I have a house over my head. I have someone that loves me. I have a cat. I have food in my belly. Life's good. A lot of people can't say they have those four things. And so, you're worried about something that, come on now, really, you're okay.
Right. Perspective is a wonderful thing. And sometimes, like, I often use the analogy of just step back, take a breath, and look at the big picture here. It is easy to get upset about something that happens at work, but when you step back and look at the big picture, maybe it's not such a big deal after all.
I also found, for me personally, getting in nature and connecting with nature is something that helped grounds me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Nature is wonderful for many, many people. Well, I believe that, the spirit of energy or the energy spirits are in nature, and we all have different things. You have a cat, and there are cat lovers in the room. There are people they're just fine without a cat. Thank you very much. There are people that love the woods, where I live in Asheville. We have the mountains, we have the woods. A lot of people are really into hiking and biking and doing things like that. Even though I live in the mountains, my very favorite place in nature is the beach. So we all have a place that I think really resonates with us.
I'm with you. I can't wait. We go to the beach every May for a week, and that is the one place for me. Time stands still. I'll be like, wow, we've been here a week. Gosh, it feels like a month. It's so great. I'm recharged, and it's just time stands still.
Yes, it's a great place to connect with spirit and with yourself, and there's something about the rhythm of the waves, I think. But other people get it in other ways. Sitting under a tree for them is their beach. But you and I are beach lovers, huh?
We are. I'm with you 100% on that. Now, Deb, what advice or suggestions would you have to someone? I always like to ask this, who's struggling right now. They're in, maybe they're going through divorce. They've lost their job. They're just maybe just trying to keep their head above water. What words of wisdom would you have for them?
Okay, the very first thing to do is you've got to take the first step. And that just sounds so easy, but it's not easy when you're in the middle of something really big like a divorce, or say someone lost a job, or financial problems, is to take the first step. And I do believe for many situations the first step is looking at your thoughts. And if you start changing your thoughts and then getting to a better place, then things will start to open up for you. Some of the things you described, the first word that came to me was overwhelmed. And when someone's overwhelmed, whether it's with sadness or anxiety or just, troubling thoughts all the time, you just have to take the first step and get past it. A lot of people say this too shall pass. And that's good, because when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like it's ever going to pass. It feels like you're going to be stuck there forever. But if you can start moving forward with your thoughts, and then your thoughts should lead you to some actions, whether it's talking with someone, whether it's doing something concrete, like, say, if you lost a job, getting out the old resume and start brushing it up, showing your resume to people, networking, whatever it is. But if you haven't changed your thoughts, like, say, if you're saying, I'll never get a job, then it's hard to get out that resume.
Absolutely. And that kind of, I think you answered my second question, but I'm always about, again, I believe there's flow and action, but what one step can people take to reawaken their brilliance right after this broadcast, tonight before bed, or tomorrow in the morning? I would say you'd probably say change your thoughts. Would that be it?
Yes. Yes, I would say. And, really believe that what feels like's not possible is possible for you. And really believe that, and then change your thoughts to support that possibility versus supporting the impossibility of, and it's been a difficult economy. There's been people, still some people out of work 2, 3, 4 years. It's hard to stay positive. It's hard to give yourself those thoughts. But every time you say a negative thought, you are creating negative energy, which only makes it that much harder.
Absolutely. Now, Deb, tell us where we can find out more information about you. If you have your book and want to hold it up, where can people buy that? All that good stuff, or any classes, whatever you want to share.
Okay, thank you. This is the book. It is called Believe and It Is True, A Story of Healing and Life Lessons. My website is Deb Lloyd Healing. That's DEBLLOYD healing.com. And you can order the book directly from me, and you'll get an autographed copy. It is also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, major bookstore websites, and is both in paperback and an ebook format. And last but not least, you can go to your local independent bookstore and order it. Since doing this book, I've become acutely aware of how the bookstores are struggling. And even though I buy a lot of my books on the websites, and we have to be honest, there's discounts, I also love to go and buy some of my books from the local bookstores and keep them going, because I like to go look at books before I purchase them. Mm-hmm. And if I see one at a bookstore that's calling my name, I just go buy it. So, and that's helping out the local folks.
Well, here we have Dancing Moon books, mm-hmm. which would be up your alley for your topic. And we have, I just thought of Romans, which is in Pasadena, California. Amnon, help me out. What's the bookstore on Wade Avenue next to Whole Foods? I'm having a moment. Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay, well, if I think of that, someone, if we have a listener, please shout it out. Another one that might, they were just up under new ownership, but those are two. If you haven't checked, I'll think of it and send that to you. But fantastic. So that's Deb. LloydHealing.com. You can get the book there, your local independent. Any classes or anything else you'd want to share?
Yes, well, I do Reiki trainings all the time. I do at least one a month. I just finished Reiki 1 last Sunday. I'll be doing a Reiki 2 class in February here in Asheville. And then on my website, I do have all my future dates. And then another event that my husband and I will be going to is Victory of Light in Cincinnati. It's a huge mind-body spirit festival. They do it twice a year. And I think I'm going to be one of the speakers again this year. And so my husband does massage and Reiki, and I sell my book as well as other books from the publisher. John Hunt Publishing is a mind-body spirit company. So I'm helping out some of the other authors by bringing books to the festivals and educating people.
Outstanding.
Yeah, it's a great time. I have more fun talking to people at the festivals.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, often about Reiki. They come to me at all levels. They've never heard of it to they're a Reiki master. And we can, talk about trainings and whatever and some of our experiences. So I love that part of just meeting people and sharing our experiences.
Excellent. Well, if you go to DebLloydHealing.com, you'll be able to find out her schedule and all that good stuff. And we have our online Body, Mind, Spirit class here, Reawaken Your Brilliance. And it is Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, on how to consciously parent. So if you're looking at ways to raise healthy, happy children, got an online panel for you. Again, get more kids that were happy and healthy. I think we live in a much better place, and you can find that out, more information at reawakenyourbrilliance.com. And Deb's book is great. It's an easy read. It's a good read, and she gives you lots of practical information, which I think is very helpful. So Deb, thanks for being a sport, and everyone, I hope that we're staying warm and snow-free in the Southeast, where we should not have snow most of the time, although it is magical. We're enjoying it today. But I thank you for your time, and everyone, we will plan on seeing you here next week. Have a great night. Bye now.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, and if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.